Opening. Why do Zen masters rarely overthink? And what do they know about the mind that we have forgotten? Wherever you are in the world tonight, welcome. This is Sleepy Eastern Philosophy coming to you from Japan. Find a comfortable position. Let your body settle wherever you are. A bed, a couch, somewhere quiet that belongs to you for the next hour or so. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw unclench. Let the breath arrive on its own, without effort. You don't have to do anything with it. Just notice it's already happening. Tonight, we are going to spend time with a problem you know very well. Not the problems you were thinking about today. The specific ones. The ones with names and deadlines and consequences. But the thinking about the thinking. The loop that starts when the problem is technically over, but the mind hasn't received the message yet. The rehearsing of conversations that already happened. The planning of responses to things that may never happen. The background hum of a mind that was designed for vigilance living in a world that never fully powers down. Overthinking. You know exactly what it feels like. The way a thought arrives, gets examined, seems to resolve, and then returns, slightly altered, ready to be examined again. The way the mind reaches for certainty and finds, instead of certainty, more questions. The way the night amplifies all of it. Because in the dark and the quiet, there is nothing to distract from the loop, nothing to pull the attention outward, just you and the thoughts and the hours until morning. Tonight, we are going to look at this through the eyes of people who understood it long before it had a name. The Zen teachers of Japan and China. The poets and monks who sat with the problem for centuries and found, on the other side of it, something remarkably still. Not by fighting the mind, not by emptying it, not by being smarter or more disciplined or more enlightened, but by understanding it differently, by changing their relationship to thought rather than their quantity of thoughts. That shift is what tonight is about. And it begins right here, right now, with this breath and the willingness to just be here for a while. There is no destination to arrive at tonight. No level of stillness you need to achieve before you have earned sleep. No correct way to listen. No wrong way to drift. Just a quiet hour in good company, sitting with one of the oldest questions a human mind can ask. Not how do I stop thinking, but what am I before the thinking begins? The Zen masters spent lifetimes on that question. Tonight, you have an hour. And an hour, it turns out, is enough to begin. Whatever brought you here tonight, whatever loop is running, whatever worry is waiting, you made a good choice to stop and be here for a while. That choice, small as it seems, is itself a kind of practice. The turning toward the quiet. The willingness to listen instead of loop. That is where it starts. That is always where it starts. Block 1. The mind that won't quiet down. There is a phrase in Zen Buddhism, monkey mind, the restless, chattering, branch-jumping quality of an untrained human mind. One moment, it is here, on this breath. The next, it has swung to tomorrow's meeting, to something someone said 3 weeks ago, to whether you said the right thing, to what you should have said instead, to a worry that has no resolution, to a plan that has no beginning, to a feeling you can't quite name that sits somewhere between your chest and your throat and refuses to be categorized. The monkey doesn't stop because you ask it to. If anything, asking it to stop makes it louder. Have you noticed that? The moment you tell yourself not to think about something, that thing fills the entire room. Modern psychology has a name for this: ironic process theory. The harder you try to suppress a thought, the more available that thought becomes. Tell yourself not to think of a white bear, and the white bear is suddenly everywhere. The Zen teachers knew this, not as a theory, but as something they had sat with directly, in years of meditation, in the cold hours before dawn, in the simple and demanding practice of just sitting. They did not solve the monkey mind by fighting it. They solved it, if solved is even the right word, by understanding what it was. And what they found was not what you might expect. Think for a moment about the particular quality of tonight's overthinking. Maybe it is something you said or didn't say. Maybe it is a decision that sits unresolved, a problem that has too many variables, a future that refuses to clarify itself. Whatever the content, the structure is probably familiar. The same thought arrives, you process it, you reach a partial conclusion, and then, sometimes within minutes, sometimes within seconds, the thought arrives again, as if the processing never happened, as if the mind did not receive the memo that this particular worry has already been examined from every available angle and found to contain no new information. This is not a failure of intelligence. If anything, overthinkers tend to be highly intelligent people. People whose minds are genuinely capable of holding complexity, of seeing multiple sides of a situation simultaneously, of imagining consequences and implications in fine detail. The problem is that these same capacities, which are genuinely useful in the right context, run on without an off switch. The Zen tradition does not pathologize this. It does not say, your mind is broken. It says, your mind is untrained. And untrained things can be trained. That is the beginning of the whole teaching. Block 2. What overthinking actually is. Here is something the Zen tradition understood that took Western psychology considerably longer to articulate. Overthinking is not a thinking problem. It is an attachment problem. The mind is not malfunctioning when it loops. It is doing exactly what it was built to do, holding on to things that feel unresolved, scanning for threats, rehearsing scenarios, trying to achieve through thought a sense of safety and certainty that thought, by its nature, cannot provide. The Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki, who brought Soto Zen to America in the mid-20th century, and whose words in Zen mind, beginner's mind, have guided practitioners for decades, described the problem this way. He said the mind is like a cow in a large field. You don't need to fence the cow in a tiny pen. You just need a large enough field, and the cow will graze naturally, without needing to be controlled. The overthinking mind is like a cow that has been put in too small a pen. It paces, it loops, it pushes against the walls, not because it is broken, but because it needs more space. The Zen answer to overthinking is not less thinking, it is bigger space. A quality of awareness that is not threatened by thoughts, not tangled in them, not trying to resolve them before they are ready to be resolved. Just watching, just here, wider than any single thought. Now consider what happens when you actually try to stop overthinking. Most people, when they notice they are looping, respond in one of two ways. Either they try to force the thought out, which, as we just discussed, makes it louder, or they follow the thought all the way to its conclusion, only to find that the conclusion generates new thoughts, which require their own following, which produce their own conclusions in a chain that has no natural end. Both strategies operate on the assumption that the solution to thinking too much is more thinking, just better thinking, more efficient thinking, thinking that arrives, this time, at a resolution that sticks. The Zen insight is that this assumption is the problem. You cannot think your way out of overthinking for the same reason you cannot use a fire to put out a fire. The tool is also the problem. What is required is something different in kind. Not better thinking, but a shift in the relationship to thinking itself. A step back, a widening. The discovery that you are not your thoughts, that you are the awareness in which thoughts arise, and that awareness, unlike thoughts, does not loop, does not grasp, does not panic. It is simply here, open, steady as the field the cow grazes in. There is a phrase that appears across many Buddhist traditions in slightly different forms. Thoughts are not facts. This sounds obvious when you say it plainly. Of course, a thought is not a fact. A thought is a mental event, electrical, temporary, constantly changing. And yet, at 2 a.m, in the middle of a loop, the thought this situation is hopeless does not feel like a mental event. It feels like an assessment, a conclusion reached by a reliable process, something that must be taken seriously and responded to. The Zen tradition would say, notice the difference between the thought and the believing of the thought. The thought arrives on its own. You did not choose it. The believing is where you have some say, not by arguing with the thought, not by replacing it with a more positive thought, but by recognizing it as a thought, an event in the mind, no more authoritative about reality than the sound of a car passing outside. Just a sound, just a thought, arising and passing, the field remains. Block 3. The concept of Fushiryo. There is a word in Japanese Zen that is worth sitting with tonight. Fushiryo. It is sometimes translated as non-thinking, or thinking beyond thinking, or the thought that is not a thought. Dogen Zenji, the 13th century Japanese monk who founded the Soto school of Zen and whose writings in the Shobogenzo remain among the most subtle and demanding texts in the entire Buddhist tradition, used this word to describe what happens in deep meditation. A student once asked Dogen, "What do you think about while sitting in Zazen?" Dogen replied, "Think of not thinking." The student asked, "How do you think of not thinking?" Dogen answered, "Non-thinking." This exchange has puzzled and illuminated practitioners for 800 years. What Dogen was pointing at was not the suppression of thought. He was not saying, "Empty your mind, go blank, force the thoughts out." He was pointing at something more subtle, a quality of presence that neither grasps thoughts nor pushes them away, that allows thinking to arise and pass without becoming caught in the story the thinking tells. Most of us, most of the time, do not experience our thoughts this way. We experience our thoughts as us, as the truth about the situation, as evidence about who we are and what our life means. The thought "I made a mistake" becomes "I am a mistake." The thought "this might go wrong" becomes "this will go wrong." The thought "I don't know what to do" becomes "I am someone who never knows what to do." This is the territory that Dogen's non-thinking is pointing beyond. Not beyond thought itself, beyond the identification with thought that turns every passing mental event into a conclusion about reality. Dogen's own life is instructive here. He left Japan as a young monk, traveled to China, sat under demanding teachers in difficult conditions, and returned having understood something he could not quite put into words, which is perhaps why the Shobogenzo is so long. What he brought back was not a technique. It was a way of being with experience that neither fled from it nor was consumed by it. Fushiryo is the name for that way of being as it applies to the mind in meditation. But Dogen's deeper point is that it applies everywhere. In the kitchen, in the garden, in conversation, in the long quiet of the night, when the mind will not settle. The question is not, "How do I stop thinking?" The question is, can I hold this thought more lightly? Can I let it be here without needing to follow it? Can I be the field rather than the cow? Just for this moment. Just for this breath. That is Fushiryo in practice. Block 4. The Koan and the Short Circuit. One of the most distinctive features of Zen practice is the Koan, the paradoxical question or statement given by a teacher to a student as an object of meditation. What is the sound of one hand clapping? What was your face before your parents were born? If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. These are not riddles with answers. They are not philosophical puzzles to be solved through clever reasoning. They are, in a very specific sense, traps for the overthinking mind. The rational mind encounters a koan and immediately begins to work on it. It searches for logic. It tries approaches, discards them, tries others. It reaches for analogy and metaphor and precedent, and it fails. Always. The koan cannot be solved by the thinking mind because it was designed to exhaust the thinking mind, to bring it, through its own effort, to the end of what effort can achieve. And in that moment of exhaustion, when the mind finally stops reaching, something else becomes available. The Zen masters called this kensho, a glimpse of one's original nature, the moment when the constructed, commenting, anxious self becomes quiet enough for something deeper to be heard. What the koan teaches is not a doctrine. It teaches, through direct experience, that there is a mode of being available beyond the loop of ordinary thought. that the part of you that is trying to think its way to safety is not the only part of you, that there is awareness underneath the anxiety, stillness underneath the noise, a field wide enough that even the most persistent monkey mind can find room to graze without needing to pace. You may never work with a formal koan. Most people outside Rinzai monastery practice never do. But there is something in the koan's approach that is available to anyone who overthinks. The next time you find yourself in a loop, the same worry cycling back, the same scenario rehearsing itself, try treating it like a koan. Not trying to solve it, not trying to escape it, just sitting with it. Letting the mind exhaust itself on the question until it reaches the place where the question softens, loses its urgency, and becomes simply this: a thought in a mind on a quiet night. Nothing more, nothing less. Block 5. Basho's Pond and the Art of Not Elaborating. In 1686, the haiku master Matsuo Basho wrote what is perhaps the most famous poem in the Japanese language. In Japanese, it is 17 syllables. In English, it goes something like this: an old, silent pond. A frog jumps into the pond. Splash. Silence again. That is the whole poem. No elaboration. No explanation of what the frog represents. No reflection on the meaning of the splash. No lesson about the pond of the mind, or the frog of distraction, or the silence of enlightenment. Just a pond, a frog, a splash, silence. Basho spent years refining his practice of haiku as a form of what he called shasei, sketch from life, the direct, unmediated encounter with a moment expressed without the overlay of interpretation. In Basho's aesthetic, the deepest response to experience is not analysis, but attention. Not what does this mean, but what is this? Not what should I do with this feeling, but what does this feeling actually feel like right here, before I do anything with it. This is the opposite of overthinking. Overthinking adds layers. It takes the raw experience and immediately begins to process it. What caused it, what it implies, what it requires, what it says about the past and the future, and the kind of person who would have this experience. The Zen aesthetic, in haiku, in painting, in garden design, in the tea ceremony, in calligraphy, is always moving in the other direction, removing layers, returning to the thing itself, trusting that the direct encounter with reality is more nourishing than any commentary about it. Basho traveled through Japan for much of his adult life, walking long roads, staying in simple lodgings, writing poems about what he actually saw, not what he thought about what he saw. His most celebrated travel journal, Oku no Hosomichi, The Narrow Road to the Deep North, is a record of this practice extended across months and miles. Each poem in it is a small act of not elaborating, a deliberate refusal to turn experience into argument. There is something quietly radical about this, especially for those of us whose minds tend to turn every experience into data, every feeling into a problem to be analyzed, every moment into evidence for or against some ongoing case. The mind is building about itself. What if the frog just jumped? What if the splash was just a splash? What if this moment, this breath, this body, this quiet room didn't need to be processed into meaning before it was allowed to be experienced? That is the question Basho's poem leaves open, not as a trick, as an invitation. Block 6. Mushin in action. We spoke about Mushin, no mind, in a previous episode, but it is worth returning to tonight in this specific context. Mushin no Shin, the mind of no mind, is the state described by Zen masters and martial artists in which action arises without the friction of deliberation. The swordsman who thinks about the sword is slower than the one who doesn't. The calligrapher who thinks about the brushstroke produces a brushstroke that looks thought about. The musician who thinks about the note loses the note in the thinking. This is not mysticism. This is something athletes and performers know very well. The phenomenon of being in the zone, the flow state, the moment when self-consciousness drops away and the action happens through you rather than by you. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the psychologist who studied flow, described it as a state in which the sense of self disappears, time distorts, and performance becomes effortless. The Zen masters were describing the same territory from the inside 800 years earlier. What they noticed, and this is crucial, is that overthinking is not just unpleasant. It actively impairs performance. The mind that is commenting on what it is doing while it is doing it is using resources that the doing requires. It is like trying to run while watching yourself run. The watching slows the running. And here is the thing about the Zen masters that the question in tonight's title is really pointing at. They were not born with quieter minds. They trained toward quieter minds. Through Zazen, just sitting, through Koan work, through the physical disciplines of tea, archery, calligraphy, through the patient, daily, unglamorous practice of returning again and again to the present moment. Overthinking is not a character flaw. It is an untrained default, and defaults can be changed. The Zen archer, as described in Eugen Herrigel's classic account Zen in the Art of Archery, spends years learning not to shoot, or rather, learning to let the shot happen rather than making it happen. Herrigel, a German philosopher who studied archery in Japan, describes the agonizing process of trying to release the bowstring at the right moment, and being told repeatedly that the trying was the problem. His teacher Awa Kenzo eventually told him, "The shot will go when it is ready. Your job is not to release it. Your job is to get out of the way." This is the Mushin principle in its most concrete form. And for the overthinking mind, it offers an unexpected possibility. What if the resolution you are searching for is not something you need to think your way to? What if it will arrive on its own when the mind stops adding friction? What if getting out of the way is sometimes the most useful thing you can do? Block 7. The modern overthinking epidemic. There is a reason this topic feels urgent right now. We are living through what researchers have called an epidemic of overthinking. Studies from the University of Michigan found that 73% of adults between the ages of 25 and 35 engage in chronic overthinking. 52% of adults over 45 do the same. The causes are not mysterious. We live in an information environment that was designed at the engineering level to keep our attention perpetually activated. Every notification is a question the mind now has to process. Every piece of news is a new variable in the anxiety equation. Every social interaction leaves a residue of analysis. What did they mean? How did I come across? What should I have said differently? The overthinking mind is not weak. In many ways, it is responsive, responding to genuine complexity, genuine uncertainty, genuine demands. But the Zen tradition offers a perspective that no amount of productivity advice quite reaches. The problem is not the quantity of information. The problem is the relationship to information. A Zen master in 13th century Japan faced genuine uncertainty, genuine difficulty, genuine loss. Life was hard in ways that are hard to imagine. What they cultivated was not a life with fewer problems. What they cultivated was a quality of mind that could hold problems without being consumed by them. That could be present with difficulty without needing to resolve it immediately. That could sit with not knowing without that not knowing becoming an emergency. This is the capacity that tonight's episode is pointing toward. Not the elimination of thought, but a different relationship to it. Consider the specific texture of modern overthinking versus the kind of worry a person might have carried in a different century. A medieval farmer worrying about the harvest had a worry with clear parameters. The rain would come or it wouldn't. The crop would grow or it wouldn't. The worry was large, but it was bounded. Modern overthinking tends to be unbounded. It spreads across domains. Career anxiety bleeds into relationship. Anxiety bleeds into health. Anxiety bleeds into a general sense that something is wrong somewhere, somehow, with something. The Zen master Huangpo, the 9th century Chinese teacher whose talks were recorded by his student and have survived to this day, described the untrained mind as always reaching, always adding, always elaborating, always taking the simple and making it complex. His prescription was not to become simple. It was to stop adding complexity that wasn't there. To see what is actually present, not what the mind has built around what is present. This is harder than it sounds, but it is possible. And it begins not with a technique, but with noticing, just noticing, when the mind is adding layers to something that was, a moment ago, perfectly plain. Block 8. The ink painting and the blank space. There is something specific about Japanese Zen aesthetics that is worth noticing. In ichi-e, Japanese ink painting, the most important part of the painting is often the part that isn't painted. The blank space on the paper is not absence, it is presence. It is the breathing room that gives the image its meaning. A mountain rendered in 3 brushstrokes, surrounded by white paper, says more than a mountain painted in exhaustive detail. The detail fills in what the mind already knows how to complete. The absence invites the mind to participate, to encounter the mountain rather than consume it. This aesthetic principle, called Ma in Japanese, as we explored in a recent episode, has a direct application to the overthinking mind. The overthinker fills in all the blank space. Every uncertainty is resolved with a hypothesis. Every silence is filled with projection. Every unknown is populated with worry. The Zen aesthetic suggests a different relationship to blank space. What if you let some things remain unresolved? What if not every silence needed to be filled? What if the uncertainty itself, sat with patiently, contained something that the anxious filling in destroys? The haiku master trusted the blank space. The ink painter trusted the blank space. The Zen teacher trusts the silence between words. Tonight, you might try trusting the unresolved space in your own mind. Not forcing a conclusion, not reaching for the next thought, just here, breathing, present with what is, including what is not yet known. The Zen ink painters, the great masters like Seishu Toyo in the 15th century, would spend long periods simply looking before they picked up the brush, not planning, not rehearsing the composition, just looking, allowing the subject, a pine tree, a mountain, a crane standing in mist, to become present to them before they made any response to it. The painting that came from that quality of looking was different from a painting made from a plan. It had a directness that plans cannot produce. A quality of encounter. This is available to you tonight, not as a painting practice, but as a way of being with whatever is present. The unresolved thing in your mind, the thing that keeps coming back. What if you just looked at it? Not to solve it, not to plan around it, not to figure out what it means about you. Just looked at it, allowed it to be present. The way Seishu looked at the pine tree before he picked up the brush. Sometimes the looking is the whole practice. Sometimes the looking is enough. Block 9, Rinzai, Soto, and 2 paths through the noise. Zen Buddhism in Japan developed along 2 main schools, and their approaches to the overthinking mind are interestingly different. The Rinzai school, brought to Japan in the 12th century by the monk Issai, favored sudden awakening, the Koan, the shout of the teacher, the unexpected blow, anything that could shock the thinking mind out of its habitual patterns. Rinzai practice tends toward intensity. It believes the mind can be cracked open if the right question is asked with sufficient urgency. The Soto school, established by Dogen in the 13th century, favored gradual practice. Shikantaza, just sitting, is its heart. No koan, no goal, no achievement. Simply sitting, completely, as an expression of awakened nature. Soto practice believes the mind doesn't need to be cracked. It needs to be trusted. What is interesting is that both schools arrived, through very different routes, at the same relationship to the overthinking mind. Rinzai. Exhaust it. Break through it. Soto. Sit with it. Stop fighting it. Both point beyond it. Both trust that something is available on the other side of the mental noise. And for most of us listening tonight, neither approach requires a monastery. The koan for the modern overthinker might simply be, can I stay here for one breath? Not forever, not perfectly, just this breath, this moment, this awareness, already present, already wider than any thought it contains. There is something worth noticing about the two schools' disagreement. They argued, sometimes fiercely, about method. Rinzai teachers thought Soto's gradual approach too passive. Soto teachers thought Rinzai's intensity too effortful. But from the outside, centuries later, what strikes you is how much they agreed about the destination. Both schools produced teachers of extraordinary stillness. Both produced people who could sit with difficulty without being destroyed by it. Both produced people who, when asked a question, answered from somewhere below the noise, with a directness and a clarity that the overthinking mind can recognize as real, even if it cannot quite reach it yet. That stillness is not a personality type. It is not something some people are born with. It is, the Zen tradition insists, the natural quality of mind when the unnecessary is set down. You already have it. It is underneath the loop. It is what remains when the rehearsing stops, even briefly, even for one breath. That is the whole teaching. Both schools, 800 years apart, are pointing at the same thing. Block 10. What research says about the Zen approach? In recent decades, the neuroscience of meditation has begun to catch up with what the Zen masters described from the inside. Studies on long-term meditators show measurable changes in the default mode network, the region of the brain most associated with mind-wandering, rumination, and self-referential thought. In experienced meditators, the default mode network shows less activation during rest and faster recovery from mind-wandering. In simpler terms, the trained mind doesn't get as lost, and when it does wander, it comes back faster. This is not mystical. This is neuroplasticity, the brain's documented capacity to reshape itself in response to repeated experience. The Zen masters trained their minds the way athletes train their bodies, consistently, patiently, without expecting immediate results. And what they found, what the research is now confirming, is that the mind that appears fixed and noisy is not fixed at all. The overthinking is not permanent. It is a pattern. And patterns can change. Not through force, not through self-criticism, not through trying harder to think less, but through the patient, gentle, daily practice of returning to the present moment. One breath at a time. One sitting at a time. Over months and years, the field gets larger. The cow grazes more freely. The monkey settles. It is worth being honest about the timeline here. Meditation research generally shows meaningful changes after 8 weeks of consistent daily practice. The Zen masters, who sat for decades, would find 8 weeks a modest beginning. But the research also shows something encouraging. Even a single session of meditation produces measurable reduction in the activity of the default mode network. Even one breath returned to with intention is not nothing. The cumulative effect of returning again and again, imperfectly, without drama, is a mind that gradually finds it easier to be where it is. A mind that over time stops fighting the present moment and starts tentatively trusting it. That is what the Zen masters had, not special brains, practiced ones. Block 11, the tea ceremony and full attention. There is one more Zen practice worth considering tonight. Chado, the way of tea. The Japanese tea ceremony, developed in its classical form by the tea master Sen no Rikyu in the 16th century, is sometimes described as moving meditation. Every gesture in the ceremony is precise. The angle of the bowl, the fold of the cloth, the sound of the water, the way the tea is scooped and whisked and offered. To the outside observer, it can look like elaborate ritual, but for the practitioner, it is a practice of total presence. There is no room in the tea ceremony for overthinking, because the ceremony demands full attention to this exact movement, this exact moment, this exact bowl of tea. The mind that is fully here cannot simultaneously be somewhere else. Sen no Rikyu's guiding principle was ichi-go, ichi-e, one time, one meeting. This gathering, this moment, this cup of tea, it will never happen again in exactly this way. The people here will not always be here. The light is this light, not tomorrow's light. The temperature of the tea is this temperature, cooling as we speak. Ichi-go, ichi-e is not a philosophy of scarcity. It is a philosophy of presence. And presence, it turns out, is the natural antidote to overthinking. Not because presence stops thoughts, it doesn't, but because presence gives thoughts their proper scale. The thought that looms enormous in an unfocused mind becomes one small event in a field of direct, embodied, sensory experience. The worry about tomorrow sits alongside the warmth of a cup, the smell of tatami, the sound of water in a kettle, and somehow becomes a little less total, a little less urgent, a little more like what it actually is. A thought. Just a thought. Passing through. What Chado offers the modern overthinker is not a solution, but a demonstration. It demonstrates that full attention is possible, that the mind can be here completely, without effort, not through force or suppression, but through the gentle anchor of sensory reality. The warmth of the cup, the particular color of this particular bowl, the slight resistance of the chasen, the bamboo whisk against the tea. These are not distractions from the real work. These are the real work, the practice of returning to the physical, present, specific, again and again, with patience, until the habit of returning becomes easier than the habit of drifting. You do not need a tea ceremony to practice this tonight. The weight of the blanket, the temperature of the pillow, the particular quality of the dark behind your closed eyes. These are your bowl. This is your ceremony. One time, one meeting, this breath, this moment, this night, that is unlike any other night and will not come again. Block 12, tonight's practice, the one breath return. Before you sleep tonight, here is a practice so small it almost doesn't count as a practice. It is this. When you notice your mind has gone somewhere, some worry, some rehearsal, some loop, see if you can return to one breath. Not 10 breaths, not a meditation session, just one breath. The inhale as it is happening, the exhale as it completes. That's it. You will probably notice the mind leave again almost immediately. That's fine. That's what minds do. The practice is not staying. The practice is returning. Each return is the whole practice. Each moment of noticing, "Oh, I wondered," is not a failure. It is the practice working exactly as it should. The Zen masters did not have still minds because they were special. They had practiced returning so many times that the returning became natural. The field got larger. The thoughts became less sticky. You don't need to sit for hours. You don't need a cushion or a monastery or a teacher. You need one breath, and then, when you wander, another one. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, let the thoughts come as they will. Don't fight them. Don't follow them all the way to their conclusions. Just notice, thinking, and return to the breath. The warmth of the body in the bed, the sound of the room settling, the rise and fall of the chest. That is your pond. That is your frog jumping in. That is the splash and the silence after. You don't need to do anything with it. Just let it be here. The monkey mind tonight does not need to be stopped. It only needs company. The company of your own awareness, steady and patient, watching the branches sway, not bothered by the swaying, not needing the monkey to sit still, just present, just here, just this. There will be nights when the returning feels impossible, when the loop is too fast, the worry too loud, the distance between the thought and the noticing too thin to find. On those nights, this is still the practice. The attempt is the practice. The wanting to return, even when you cannot quite manage it, that is still the practice. Dogen wrote that the practice and the realization are not separate. The sitting is the awakening. The attempting is the arriving. You do not need to achieve stillness tonight. You only need to face in its direction. That is enough. That has always been enough. The Zen masters knew something we are slowly remembering, that the quiet is not somewhere you have to travel to. It is not on the other side of solving all the problems. It is not waiting for you at the end of a long enough to-do list. It is here, underneath the noise, available in this breath, this ordinary exhale, this moment of setting nothing down and finding that what remains is somehow sufficient. Let the thoughts think themselves. Let the mind do what minds do. And underneath all of that, just rest. The way the pond rests after the frog has jumped, the way the field rests after the cow has grazed, the way the night rests around you right now, holding everything, asking nothing, just here. Block 13. Sleep well. The Zen masters were not people who had no problems. They lived through war, drought, illness, loss. They watched students struggle. They watched teachers die. They sat with uncertainty, the way we sit with uncertainty, not knowing what would come, not always knowing what to do. What they had was not a life without difficulty. What they had was a quality of mind that did not add unnecessary suffering to the suffering that was already there. A mind that could be fully present with hard things without needing to resolve them tonight. That capacity is available to you, not as a distant achievement, not after years of practice, but as a direction, something you can lean toward, one breath at a time, beginning right now. The thinking mind will keep thinking. It will do what minds do. But underneath the thinking, steadier than any thought, quieter than any worry, already present without effort, there is awareness. The awareness that has been here all along. The awareness that is hearing these words, that is noticing the body breathe, that is, even now, even in the noise, already still. You don't have to find it. You just have to stop looking somewhere else. The monkey mind will settle. Not tonight, necessarily. Not all at once, but gradually, with patience, with the returning. It settles. The way a shaken snow globe settles when you finally stop shaking it. The way a pond returns to stillness after the frog has jumped. You have been carrying a lot. The loops, the what-ifs, the rehearsals, the things that need resolving and won't resolve tonight. You can set them down now, not permanently, just for the duration of sleep. They will be there in the morning, no more or less resolved than they are right now. And you will meet them better from the other side of rest. That is what the Zen masters knew. That is what tonight is pointing toward. That stillness is yours. It has always been yours. It does not require you to be different, or calmer, or more enlightened than you are right now. It only requires that you let this moment be what it is. Just this, just here, just the breath, arriving and departing, the body resting, the room quiet around you. The Zen masters spent lifetimes pointing at this. All their koans, their sitting, their teaching, pointing here, to this moment, to this ordinary, unremarkable, sufficient moment. Wherever you are in the world tonight, thank you for spending this time in the quiet with us. From Japan, good night, sleep well.